my darling little doves, welcome back. Today I thought I would do a video relating to old Hollywood. I've actually been thinking about doing like an old Hollywood related video for a while because I love old Hollywood. I've loved old Hollywood since I was a little girl, but I ultimately decided to do my first video in this topic on Audrey Hepburn. And this is because Audrey Hepburn was my gateway into the old Hollywood fascination to begin with. And judging from the amount of magazine articles that are written about her every year and the amount of breakfast at Tiffany's merchandise floating around on the internet, I would say that Audrey Hepburn was the gateway drug for a lot of people as well. And yes, I'll be the first of us to admit that I had a picture of Audrey in Breakfast at Tiffany's up in my bedroom wall when I was in middle school, even though I had not seen Breakfast at Tiffany's yet at that point in my life. And you know, I was thinking, along that train of
being an Audrey poser.
There are just so many people who know of her, despite maybe not even having seen Breakfast at Tiffany's or Roman Holiday or watching any of her interviews. People just know who she is. They know her image. And it led me to this question, what is the cultural relevance of Audrey Hepburn? I mean, objectively, it's not hard to be captivated by her, the way she carries herself, the way she dresses, the way she talks. It's all very elegant. But there are also plenty of old Hollywood actresses who are just as elegant, and there's not like a million Redbubble designs of them. So why Audrey? Well, let's set the scene. It's the early 1950s. We're finally in the post-war era, and in the words of Christian DIOR, women long to be women again. No more boxy uniforms, no more clothing rations. We want opulence. DIOR released his collection dubbed The New Look in 1947, and it took Europe and America by storm. The style of his collection was so feminine, the silhouettes were so flowery. This is what the post-war era needed, and consequently, his collection re-established Paris as the center of fashion. Obviously, couture is called couture for a reason, and the majority of women could not afford the real deal. But retailers like I. Magnin would reproduce Parisian designs in America at cheaper prices so that even aspiring middle-class women could afford to be trendy. Fashion was widespread at this time, and everyone and their mother wanted to be stylish. Well, not everyone's mother, but you get the point. Now, what was going on in Hollywood at this time? Major starlets of the early 1950s, like Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe, all had one thing in common. Talent is what everyone should have been thinking, but sadly, no. The answer is body. And in the 1940s and 50s, the Hollywood starlet look was pretty much all the same. Many of the starlets were curvier, their makeup was really done up, and their dresses were hyper-feminine, following the New Look style. These starlets proposed a beauty ideal that was super unattainable for the everyday woman. But this all changed when Audrey Hepburn stepped into the spotlight to star in the major motion picture Roman Holiday, released in 1953. She was described early on by Photoplay as flat-chested, slim-hipped, and altogether un-Marilyn Monroe-ish. And for a lot of young women of the 1950s, Audrey's un-Marilyn Monroe-ishness is what made Audrey so appealing. Alison Fell wrote a short autobiographical piece called Rebel with a Cause that was featured in the book Dare, Truth, or Promise, Girls Growing Up in the 50s. In it, she mentions how unrelatable all those other Hollywood starlets were. Aspiring to femininity feels like imagining you climb Mount Everest. All these film stars so impossibly hourglass and formed and grown up. Lana Turner and Marilyn with their hips and handspan waists and big cone-shaped breasts. It's still years, remember, before Twiggy and flat chests, denim, and the androgenization of glamour. Only Audrey Hepburn gives cause for hope. Of course, Audrey's 20-inch waist is not relatable for the majority of women, but in the context of 1950s Hollywood, literally like all the starlets were beautiful, curvaceous women. And when someone who is so different from the mold shows up, you as a viewer, who's also different from the mold, might just want to root for the new girl, just because even though she's different from you, she's still going in and shaking up the standards. That's one theory I have. Another theory I have is that women, a lot of women, just hated sex symbols like Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield. And they probably viewed Audrey Hepburn as the antithesis of these women that they hated because of the way Audrey looked. And I can imagine, some young girl named Dolly or something going to see Roman Holiday for the first time and being like,
"Wow, finally, a Hollywood actress with smaller boobs than me. I guess I can take my boyfriend to see this movie."
I don't know. actually, I do know because I stumbled across this research paper by Rachel Moseley back in 2000, and it's called Trousers and Tiaras, Growing Up with Audrey Hepburn. In it, she interviews 2 generations of British women on their thoughts and feelings about Audrey Hepburn. The first group grew up in the 50s and 60s, and the second group grew up in the 90s. I just want to read this little snippet from this interview with Janet, a woman in the 50s and 60s group. I just wonder why, you attracted her as a role model as opposed to, say, Marilyn Monroe. Ugh, to me, Marilyn Monroe was just tardy. Really? Absolutely and utterly. Why do you think? Well, she just looked it. And all the films that she acted in portrayed that type of person. And she did absolutely nothing for me. At all. So why wouldn't she have gone for that? I mean, because I wouldn't want to look like she looked. Even though blondes were supposed to be more attractive to men, that wasn't important to me because I just wouldn't have wanted to look like a tart. And Audrey Hepburn was absolutely opposite to that. I mean, she looked a really nice sort of person. She may not have been, but she gave that impression. And girls would want to be like that, I would have thought, rather than like Marilyn Monroe. Another interviewee from the same demographic, Bernie, said that Brigitte Bardot was made for men and that we girls took no notice of her at all. Stars like Monroe and Bardot were the enemy, and Audrey Hepburn was one of the girls. You could really relate to her. Okay, I mean, I'm gonna let anyone say whatever they want about Brigitte Bardot because she's racist, but in the year 2021, no more slander on Marilyn Monroe, please. It's over. Game over. So I'd argue that part of why Audrey is so iconic is because of how different she looked from other starlets of the time period, how she was perceived as being classy over sexy, because apparently those ideals couldn't coexist. In one of Moseley's interviews, this time with a younger woman named Lucy from the 90s group, Lucy described Audrey as a safe rival, a bit less than like, Marilyn Monroe wouldn't be a safe rival, You don't think sexy when you see Audrey Hepburn, do you? You think sweet. But it's not just that Audrey looked different because, I hate to say it, if Audrey was fat or if she was a woman of color, there's no way that she would have been solidified in the mainstream culture. Nor would she have gotten like any opportunities, but that's another issue. Audrey was different, but she still matched a beauty standard in place. It just wasn't the standard for Hollywood. Yet. But let's look at the fashion industry. According to Gaylyn Studlar, who wrote the journal article Chi-Chi Cinderella, Audrey Hepburn as Couture Countermodel, post-war high fashion made the physical ideal of the French mannequin, long, slender neck, slim-waisted body, and long legs, the increasingly desired physical type for fashionable clothes. By the mid-1950s, there was a trend towards suits and skirts that emphasized a straight silhouette. By 1957, the New York Times remarked that DIOR himself was growing fatter and fatter, but his mannequins get thinner and thinner, straighter and straighter, flatter and flatter. So Audrey Hepburn was actually the ideal figure for the fashion industry and where it was headed. It also definitely added to her allure the fact that Americans associated high fashion and class with Europe, and Audrey was European. And this is the perfect segue to my next point. Audrey is iconic for her fashion, but this is emphasized by the fact that she's also built like a fashion model. Let's talk a little bit about Audrey's style. Givenchy said that Audrey always added a twist, something piquant, amusing to the clothes. Though of course I advised her, she knew precisely what she wanted. She knew herself very well, for example, which is her good profile and which is her bad. She was very professional. No detail ever escaped her. Audrey was someone who knew what parts of her body she wanted to show off and what parts she wanted to hide. For example, she liked to wear ballet flats because she was tall and didn't want to tower over people. She wasn't afraid to incorporate masculine elements or to dress down. Her casual style usually consisted of cigarette pants or a simple skirt and a button-down shirt or turtleneck. Following along with 60s trends, she was often wearing a hat or a headscarf, and she liked miniskirts and mod coats. But something unique to her is that she didn't overindulge in jewelry, accessories, or makeup. She said before, "Jewelry just doesn't suit me, and if I wear too much makeup, my face looks like a mask instead of me. Put me in furs and jewels and I look like something off a barrel organ." She's of course known for her little black dresses and generally any garment with clean lines. There were a couple of interesting fashion moments throughout her life, but for the most part, Audrey is known for very simple yet fashion-forward silhouettes. Her most famous Breakfast at Tiffany's dress is a perfect example of this style. The front covers her collarbones, which was something she had said she was insecure about because they were so prominent, but the back makes the dress look unique and puts a bit of flair to it. She was known for wearing Givenchy both on and off screen. In fact, she was his muse, and Givenchy actually had a mannequin with her measurements to inspire him when she wasn't around. But she also felt a very special connection to him and his designs, and she's made that very clear throughout her life. In 1956, she told reporters, "His are the only clothes in which I am myself." And in a July 1969 issue of McCall's magazine, she said, "I depend on Givenchy in the same way that American women depend on their psychiatrists." Not everyone can or could afford Givenchy, but the reason everyone loves Audrey's style so much is because the simplicity of Givenchy's designs coupled with her low-effort styling are viewed as accessible.
My looks are therefore attainable.
How?
Because
Tell me how.
Because they can look like Audrey Hepburn if they want to, by
How?
cutting off their hair, by buying the large glasses, by having the little sleeveless dresses. I'm not talking about now.
Yeah,
I
then,
created
yeah.
a look
Yeah.
in order to make something of myself.
Audrey Hepburn created an iconic look, but it was one that normal women could replicate. She showed women how they didn't need to wear a ton of jewelry or sleep in hair rollers every night to feel like or look like a movie star. I don't want to misinform you all by implying that she only wore Givenchy throughout her entire life. She took a hiatus from acting in 1968 and started working for UNICEF in the 80s, which didn't pay too well. Audrey's friend, Countess Lorraine Levitelli, actually said that when Audrey was living in Rome, she had asked her for a recommendation for a dressmaker because Givenchy was just too expensive for her at that time. The Countess then introduced her to Valentino, and she loved his clothes. Audrey also started wearing a lot of Ralph Lauren later in life. In 1995, Ralph Lauren confirmed with Barry Paris that Audrey had told him, "I love Givenchy for night, but I love your sport clothes for daytime." But I guess the question is, how did Audrey develop this Audrey style? Even though her first big film was Roman Holiday, and Audrey admitted that working with Edith Head taught her how to dress her body, I would say that Sabrina was the game changer in terms of making Audrey a fashion icon. This is because Sabrina was her first collaboration with Givenchy, but not a lot of people knew that at the time of the movie's release. Edith Head, the reigning queen of costume design during the 1950s, was initially asked to do the costumes for Sabrina. But what ended up happening is that Billy Wilder, the director, actually decided he wanted Audrey to wear real Parisian clothes after her little Cinderella transformation in the movie. If you haven't seen this movie, basically Sabrina goes off to Paris and comes back as this blooming flower. Edith Head was not happy about this because this meant that she would only be designing Audrey's pre-transformation outfits, which were a lot less exciting and glamorous. But she reluctantly agreed, and she sent Audrey to Paris to look for her costumes. That's when Audrey met Hubert de Givenchy. Givenchy was 26 at the time, and he was still young in the industry. There's some sources that say Audrey was actually sent to see Cristobal Balenciaga first because Balenciaga was way more established at the time. But he said he was too busy because he was focused on making his next collection, and he referred Audrey to go see Givenchy, who used to work under him. When Givenchy heard that a Miss Hepburn was going to be arriving, he initially thought it was going to be Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn was a much more well-known actress at the time. She made her Hollywood acting debut in the 1930s, so her name's just been around for longer. He was surprised when he saw Audrey, but he did tell her that he didn't have time to make her any custom clothes because he was also focused on making his next collection. And Audrey was kind of like, well, okay, let me just see what you've already made. Audrey picked out 3 outfits to be used in the movie: the sophisticated town suit and turban, the black satin cocktail dress, and the strapless white ball gown with black embroidery and ruffle. And of course, audiences watching fell absolutely in love with the designs. The Hollywood Reporter said, "This is the best woman's picture since 3 Coins in the Fountain. It's too bad that the storytelling wardrobe has not been shot in color." And the movie really made it clear that they were purposely showing off Audrey's wardrobe too. There were a lot of lingering shots on the clothing, and the way that Audrey posed in them was very model-like. Jackie Stacey conducted a study where she talked to a bunch of British female moviegoers in the 40s and 50s. She concluded that these women enjoyed the scenes that focused on the characters' clothing. She says, These shots provide the film's female audience members ample time and a generous view so that they may study costume details and admire the heroine's enviable ability to use fashion as a traditional feminine path to social improvement and, of course, romantic happiness. Sabrina's new French clothes are not only beautiful, but they are integral to the story, representing her moving up in life. And what's really interesting is that Audrey dressed very similarly on screen as she did off screen, at least at the peak of her fame. So I feel like there's a lot of confusion where people don't know the difference between Audrey and her characters, and a lot of that is because Audrey's off-screen style and image are so tied to her on-screen characters. This is also exacerbated by the fact that there's a consistency across many of her most memorable roles. In Roman Holiday, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Charade, and How to Steal a Million, Audrey's characters have a very similar je ne sais quoi. They all carry themselves in an upper-class manner, are dressed in couture clothing, and move gracefully across the screen. And in the movies Sabrina, Funny Face, and My Fair Lady, Audrey's characters go through Cinderella transformations where they inevitably end up like all the other upper-class characters in the movies I previously mentioned. These Cinderella transformations are especially impactful because they depict a modest, everyday kind of girl who becomes a desirable couture woman, but who still retains her sweet personality. The Cinderella transformation trope is also surprisingly resonant with Audrey's personal life.
In 1939, the Nazis marched into her homeland, and for the next 5 years, Audrey learned what it was like to be hungry, to be afraid, to hide from the bombs, to simply survive.
And then, with this tragic backstory, she grew up to become this glamorous actress. Audrey's characters are also perceived as very young, usually younger than her actual age. They're kind of sexually immature, which is interesting because Audrey did have her own string of love affairs and scandals throughout her life. The girls she plays are also fun and adventurous. Princess Anne runs away from her duties to explore Rome and have a good time. Holly Golightly just does whatever she wants, whenever she wants. Sabrina, when she puts on her black dress, looks elegant but retains her youthful charm. In the words of Studlar, such moments illustrate how Hepburn's persona brought high fashion down to earth and made it emotionally accessible to young middle-class women. I think what's interesting is that a lot of her appeal is this apparent relatability because her characters are mostly transitional characters, representing a stage in life where young women are carefree and bear no responsibilities. One of Moseley's young interviewees, Anna, said Audrey is accessible unlike other stars, but bases her assessment on Holly Golightly and not really Audrey herself. It's like Ingrid Bergman. You couldn't imagine sort of like, come on Ingrid, let's go down to the pub, or something like that. But you could imagine taking Audrey Hepburn out, you know, like the bit where they get drunk in Breakfast at Tiffany's. You're just thinking, this could be you, you know, like you're sort of in a bar with Audrey sort of thing, you know? Molly Haskell, a feminist film critic, believed that Audrey's playfully adolescent characters, combined with her flat body type, evoked strong feelings of identification with young girls who longed for a time when they didn't have their boobs and curves that they felt imprisoned them to the role of woman and mother. The irony is that Audrey was actually very motherly and she loved taking care of children.
You made the film Wait Until Dark in 1967, and then it was something like 10 years before you made another film. Why did you stop?
I quit movies to stay with my children because I couldn't take the stress of being away from my son. I missed him too much. I became emotionally unhappy.
And later in life, up until she tragically died of cancer in 1992, Audrey devoted herself to working with UNICEF as a humanitarian ambassador, where she would travel the world and nurse impoverished children.
And if this career has left me with something very special, it's the fact that it's left me with this, whatever it is, this voice, this curiosity people have still to see me, to talk to me, which I can use for the good of children. What could be nicer?
A lot of people who consume her image today don't really know this about her, and while I think what she did was significant and definitely tells you more about who she was as a person, I don't think that her UNICEF work necessarily contributed to her legacy in the mainstream culture. I feel like Audrey's legacy is not directly related to her real personality, though I'm sure she was lovely, but based on people's projection of who she was when they watch her movies. In the words of Chloe, one of Moseley's young interviewees, Audrey seems to be her in all of her films. Although she's sort of different characters, there seems to be this kind of thing that you can't define as present in all her films, in her, and she's kind of her in all her films. When she's doing on screen, she totally seems natural, and that she's doing all the things she would be doing off screen. In a world where everyone seems to be fake, or trying too hard, or catfishing on social media, Audrey's authenticity, reinforced by her acting and style consistency, is refreshing and timeless. So this is the end. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think about Audrey Hepburn, what actresses you would want to hear me talk about, maybe later in the future, or just how your day's going. I'll see you next time. Bye.